Hi everyone, Savannah here, and today we're drawing these adorable little mice working together to decorate a giant cherry top pastry. Everything you need to follow along, including the free brush set, color palette, and sketch template, is linked below. I'm drawing in Procreate on the iPad, so let's go ahead and jump right in. The very first thing we're going to do is change that background color, so click into layers, select that background color layer, and scroll up until you find the mice baking color palette that I have provided for you, and we're going to grab this grayish green color for that background. Now go ahead and create a new layer, bring it below the outline layer, and we're going to work on the pastry first. So I'm going to grab one of the brown colors. Now there are quite a few colors you can pick from. I'm going to go with one of the slightly darker brown colors here, and I'm going to use the circle brush for this and trace and fill in the shape of the main pastry here, and then we'll keep working up on the layers here with the other areas of the pastry. Now I like to turn that outline layer off so that I can edit any of the edges if I want to make them a little bit different or modify that shape before I add in any details. I like to do this step before I move on. Now on a new layer right above that pastry layer, we're going to add the icing, and I'm just going to grab one of these light grayish orange colors for the icing, and the same thing I'm going to trace and fill in the shape of the icing here. And then go ahead and turn that outline layer off and edit the edges of the shape until you like how it's looking. Now I'm going to erase that line to the left, and then I'm going to set both these layers to alpha lock, and we're going to work on the detail work now before we move on to the other areas. Let's go ahead and work on the pastry part of this. So I'm going to grab a lighter orange color. It's right next to the brown that we used for that base. I'm grabbing that circle blend brush. I'm just going to go over the surface and add in a little bit of color variation here just over the entire surface. So this is a pressure sensitive brush, so you don't have to press too hard if you don't want to. Just add a little bit of color, or if you want to add more color, you can press a little bit harder. In some areas, I might do that just to brighten up certain sections, and then I will go lightly press towards the edge, especially up underneath the frosting to give it a little bit of shadow. Now I'm going to grab a light yellowish orange color, and on the left side I'm going to focus on adding a lot more of that color. I'll add a little bit to the right as well, but I'm mainly focusing on the left side being a little bit brighter on this pastry, as if that's where the light source is, and then going a little bit more dark on the right side. And if you went a little too bright with that color, you can tone it down a little bit by grabbing one of those other, either the orange color or the darker color that we started with. You can also go around underneath of where the frosting is to add that shadow. Like I mentioned, I left a little bit of dark on the right side there, but I want to darken it a little bit more. So I'm adding a little more shadow, especially on this left side. I went a little too bright with that lighter color. So I'm just softening up just a little bit, darkening up a little bit there. And then I'm just going to go over this section a little bit more, alternating between these three colors. So I'll grab a little bit of that lighter color that I used to brighten some spots that maybe I went a little too dark on. So I'm just going to keep building up the layers here before I move on to the bright section of this pastry. Now I'm going to grab that brown color, that original color we used for the base of this pastry, and I'm going to darken more of the shadows on the right side where the frosting is. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a texture surface on the pastry. I'm just going to use that brown color still with that circle blend brush. I'm very lightly just adding some texture. So just kind of like scribbles to the surface of this pastry. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can do more straight lines if you want to, just to kind of blend it out, but I just wanted to give it a little bit of a texture on the surface of this pastry. And same thing like I did on the left, I'm just going to keep building up the layers here with those two colors that I use for this section. Now let's work on the frosting. I'm grabbing another brown color. It's different than the one we used for the base of the pastry. It's a little more of a cool brown, and so I'm using that for the shadow on the frosting. And I'm just gonna keep building this up. So I'm again thinking that light source is coming from the left side. So my shadow is going to be on the right side of the drips here, like you see that I'm doing, and then underneath the cherry, and then to the right of these kind of, I guess they're red sprinkles is what I added to the top of the pastry here. So I'm just adding that color in, and then I'm grabbing this orangish color. Again, it's a little bit different than the other colors that we've used, but I'm doing that right next to the dark brown color that we have here, just to the left of it, and then I will work on blending these colors out. Now, what I like to do sometimes in this situation is turn that outline layer off because there's a lot of small areas here. So it's hard to see when you start blending in these sections what's what. And so I'm just going to be touching up some of these areas. And then, like I mentioned, I'm going to work on blending a lot of these colors out. You can use the circle blend brush for this. You can use the square blend brush for this. I typically go with the circle blend brush for a lot of my detail work, but either of those will work in this scenario. It just depends on the shape that you want for that blending. So I'm just going to go through this. I'm going to blend and soften the edges of all of these colors that we just added with that circle blend brush, and then we will move on to the next section. And I'm also going to grab in some in-between colors. And what I mean by that is because this is a pressure sensitive brush, when you blend these colors out, you start getting in-between colors. So colors that blend between this almost white color and those brown colors. And so I'm just grabbing those colors to help blend it out even further. I'm just using, use your finger, hold on the screen where that color that you want to grab from is, and then it should grab that color for you in the color picker. So I'm just doing that to blend these colors out a little bit further. And you're just going to keep blending. This is a tedious step. If you blended faster than I did, then you can move on to the next step. For this one, I just kind of went over it several different times because I just wasn't liking how it was looking. And so I just wanted to keep going over it a couple more times until it was looking how I wanted to. So I'm just going to keep blending here, and then I will meet you all in that next step. And I probably spent way too much time blending this section out, but I really wanted to have a nice smooth look here. Some of my videos I do, I don't do it quite as smooth as this, so I just wanted to make this one smooth. After we get done with the topping here, we're going to add in those red sprinkles, and we're going to do those on a new layer, and so I'll do that here in just a second. Now on a new layer right above the frosting layer, we're grabbing this medium red color. It says dark red, but it's not quite as dark as our darkest. Grab the circle brush and we're just going to add in where these circles are, some sprinkles. And then just to add a little bit of detail work, set that layer to alpha lock, grab this lighter red, and on the left side, we're just adding a little bit of light red because again, that light source is coming from the left. And then you can blend this out a little bit more if you want to. You can also grab the dark red if you want to add more shadow to the right. I went a little bit lighter, even more than what is in that color palette, just to add a smidgen more lightness to the center of these sprinkles that we have here, and then I'm going to blend that out. So I did all of the adding the color in with the circle brush, and now I'm using that circle blend brush to blend these colors out a little bit more to give it more of um, a gradual color change there. So that's what I did here for those sprinkles. Now we are going to work on the cherries, and I do have a separate video focused just on a pair of cherries connected to one stem if you want to go a little bit more in depth. But essentially what we're going to do is trace and fill in the shape of these cherries, and I am picking that medium red color. Sometimes I like to start with a darker color and build up the lighter colors, but for this I'm just going to start with that medium red and then add in the other colors. So trace and fill in the shape, turn that outline layer off, make sure it looks how you want it to look before you alpha lock that layer, and then we can start building up the colors. So again, the light source is coming from the left, so you want lighter colors to be on the left side, darker colors to be on the right. So I'm going to start with that lighter red color, and I'm using my circle blend brush, and we're going to add in that lighter color in the left side here. So that top left area is where I'm going to add that lighter color. And it is a pressure sensitive brush, so you notice that I very lightly added that color at first, and then I started pressing harder to add even more of that pigment in. So you can do it that way. If you want, you could start with a heavy press and then blend out outwards. That's kind of what I did with the one below. The one up above, I started light and then went a little bit harder. But either way, it is pressure sensitive, so play around with it. Cherries are a great way to see how to use these brushes and how to blend it out. So I definitely recommend watching that cherry video if you haven't already to see how the brushes work. And I'm doing the same thing now. I'm adding in this very dark red color for the shadow of the cherry. Then I'm going back to that medium red color and blending it out. So I don't want it to be quite as dark. I want to soften it up a little bit. So I'm just going over it with that red color that we used for the base. And then I'm just going to keep building up the layer here for these cherries. Now, cherries are very shiny, and so I'm grabbing that light, almost whitish orange color, and I'm just adding a little bit of white here, still using that circle blend brush, but I'm adding that shiny white reflective surface to this cherry to make it look more like a cherry. Now on a new layer below the cherry layer that we just worked on, we're going to add the stems. So I'm grabbing, it says brown, but it's really like an orange color. I'm grabbing that brownish orange color, the circle brush, and I'm just going to fill in a little bit here of the stem at the top and then bring it all the way down. So don't worry, it's not going to be fully this orange color. We are going to add green in, but I'm using this just to trace and fill in the shape of the stem, and then I'll set it to alpha lock like we've been doing and add in the details. And now I'm going to grab, it's also called brown, but it's really like a green. I'm going to grab that color, that circle blend brush, and just on one side of the stem, I'm just going to add in some of that green color. It doesn't matter what side of the stem. If you want to put it on the side where there's more of that light source, you can, but we're just going to keep building up the colors. Really what matters is where you put this dark red. So I'm using this dark red as the shadow, similar to what we used the cherry, but I'm using it as the shadow for the stem. So I'm going on the right side of the stem here for the one up above, and I'm going to do a little bit underneath here on the stem to the left because the source is coming from that kind of top left area. And just keep building up the stems until it's looking how you want it to look. And then you can also, I'm going to do this here in a second, but you can also add a little bit of that lighter white color to the edge of the stem. Now you don't want it to overpower, you just want a little bit of it to give it a little bit of a shine. Not much because it's not as shiny as the cherry, but just to give it a little bit of that reflective, like that source is hitting it. So I'm using a light yellow for this and just on the very edge adding in that color. And now let's go ahead and work on the mice here. I'm going to start with their ears, their hands, their feet, and their tails. I'm going to do those all in the same color on the same layer. And for this, I'm actually going to end up using that red orange color that you see here on the screen at the bottom there. I'm using the circle brush for this. And like I said, I'm going to go through and do the ears, their hands, their feet, and their tails all on the same layer. I'm also going to do their noses and a little bit inside their mouth. all of that is in that same red-orange color. And I am just keeping the outline layer on for now, but once I add in all these details, I'll go through all of this and just touch up edges where I need to. So in some areas, for instance, this ear that I'm working on here, the inner part where that hair is going to be covering, I don't need to touch up that area, but the outer part on the right, I will need to touch up because that is where the outer ear is going to be, and there's nothing there covering it. And then I'm also going to move this layer up a little bit. It's just kind of trying to figure out placement for this. I think I want this above the cherry layer and the stem layer, but we'll see if I do it in a couple different layers for the hands and the stems. And one thing as you're filling in these details that you can do is turn the opacity down on the outline layer, which is what I did here, so that I can really see where the edges are. That helps you don't have to do as much fine tuning later on, but I still do turn the outline layer off for fine tuning because I want to see exactly where those edges are and if I need to fix anything. And like I said, we're just going through adding in the base color for the ears, the nose, the mouth, the hands, the feet, and the tail for these mice. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn that outline layer off and just go through all the edges that we just added or all the colors we just added and fix the edges there. So that's what I'm going to do here is just go through, fix up any areas that look not as smooth as I like them, and then we will move on to the next step. And now let's go ahead and create a new layer. We're going to work on the hair on the mice, but I'm also going to set that layer that we just worked on to alpha lock so we can add details later. But for the mice here, I'm going to grab that orange color here. It's right next to that dark brown that you see. It's called orange, but it's really kind of like a brownish color. And I'm going to trace and fill in the areas where there's going to be that hair on the mice. So their heads and a little bit underneath their aprons here. And you can increase the size of the brush here. I just end up using a smaller brush, but because this is the base color, we're not adding in those hair details quite yet. It doesn't matter what size brush you use, as long as you're just filling in that base layer. You can also drop the color into that area. Just be mindful of the edges around when you drop that color in to fill that whole space, because you want to make sure that it's completely closed in and there's no gaps peeking into the background. Now, when I was working on the bottom half of the mouse here, adding in the color, I did go a little bit underneath where the apron is. I tend to go a little bit outside the lines in some areas just because I want to make sure that when we add in those details like the apron here, it is covered, that there's no gaps to the background underneath. So I go a little bit outside of the area that I actually need so that when we're adding those details, we don't have any areas that are um, not filled in that need to be filled in. So that's why I went a little bit outside of the lines for this area. And now we're going to do the other two mites as well. So we're going to do the bottom half of the mouse here where their hair is, and then also the head, and then we'll do the other one as well. Now, one thing I didn't mention with the first mouse that we did that I'll mention with this one is that the orange layer where the ear and the nose and the hands and all that, that layer is underneath this hair layer. So when you're going around the edge around those sections, make sure you're not completely covering them because this layer is above that layer. You can color it right over top of it, which we don't want, right? We want some of that edge to be there. So just be mindful of that as you're working in filling these areas. And now let's go ahead and add in the details for this last mouse here. Now there are quite a few layers to these mice. We have the feet, ears, hand, tail layer. We have this hair layer, we have a shirt layer, and we have an apron layer, but we're going to keep those all on separate layers, and then I'll show you how we stack those when we get to each of those sections. But we want these on separate layers because we're going to be adding in details. If you did this all on the same layer, it would be harder to add in shadows and highlights because you'd be potentially cutting into these other shapes. So that's why we're doing all of these on separate layers. And now that we have this layer done, we're going to start working on the shirt layer for each of these mice. So let's go ahead and create a new layer right above this layer that we have for the fur. And I'm going to use this grayish orange color. It's what's called grayish orange on the bottom there. I'm going to use that for the base color of the shirts. And same thing, we're going to go through and trace and fill in the shapes of the shirts here. Now, one thing to notice as you are working on filling in these shirts is that this layer is above the layer that we have the hands and the feet. And so when you're adding in these details here, you don't want to go over those areas. You want to just follow the outline that we have created and very carefully up along the edge of those layers fill in that shape, because otherwise if you go completely right over it, you're going to block out that original design. So just very carefully go and trace around at the edge of those layers where we are doing it for the outline for the shirt, and then you can fill in the rest of the area. So for instance, this hand here, we want that to be on top of the shirt layer in the back for that left hand, but if we went over that hand completely, we would lose that. So just be mindful of that. And we're just going to continue filling in these shirts, and then when we're done with this layer, we will add another layer right on top and work on the aprons, and then we will set all of these layers to alpha lock and start adding in details once we kind of place the coloring. And don't forget to turn that outline layer off from time to time to make sure your edges are looking how you want them to look. Now let's go ahead and create a new layer right above the layer we just worked on, and you can set the other layers to alpha lock now if you want, or towards the end, but we're going to add in the aprons. I'm going to do this blue-green color at the top of that color palette there that you see. I'm going to use that for the base color of the aprons, and then like I said, we will alpha lock all these layers and start adding details in a second. And in case I haven't mentioned in a while, I am using that circle brush for adding in all of these base color details in. Once we add in details, I'll switch over to either the circle blend or square blend, probably the circle blend for a lot of the details, but for now I'm just using the regular circle brush to fill in the base colors. And again, you can increase the brush size once you start filling it in. For some reason, I didn't for this, but it does go faster if you increase that brush size. I would just be mindful around the edges because if you have a larger brush around the edges, you tend to go outside those lines. So just be mindful of that. And like I said, we're going to add in details after we kind of block all these colors in a minute. So don't worry about the details quite yet. And same thing like I mentioned earlier, this layer is on top of all the other layers, so just be mindful of the edges, especially around the cherries. We don't want to cover too much of that cherry with this layer or the shirt here as we go up in the underneath part here, so just be mindful of that. And now before I set this layer to alpha lock, I'm going to just check the edges and clean up any areas that I need to clean up. And now we just need to finish this last apron. Now I did color over the stem here of the cherry, but don't worry, we will erase part of this away, which is easier to color it in first. And then, like I mentioned, we'll erase it so that that stem pulls through. And now we need to add the bench, so add a new layer. We're just going to put this below most of these other layers. We want it below the mouse layer, and I'm just grabbing this dark red color. It's the same color we used for the stem and part of the cherry, and I'm just going to fill in the stool here that this mouse is kind of resting up against. And now let's go ahead and add a new layer. We're going to put this below all the other layers because this is going to be for the ground layer, and then we will work on the background as well before we start adding in details to the mice. So for this layer on the ground, I'm going to pick, it's a brown color, but it's almost like a tan-ish color, or it's called orange, but it's almost like a tannish color. I'm grabbing the square blend brush for this, and I'm just going to start filling in most of this color on the bottom here. And I used the square blend brush because I wanted a little bit of that background color to pull through. Now I'm grabbing that grayish color to put a little bit of lighter variation there. And then to do a shadow, I'm grabbing this grayish green color and very lightly I'm going to add in some shadow here. Now because we're using that square blend brush, it is pressure sensitive, so you can play around with the pressure here if you want to go a little bit heavier or lighter. I did switch over to the circle blend brush to kind of blend it out a little bit more. I wasn't liking how square those edges were, so I'm switching it to that circle blend, but you can keep it on the square blend brush if you want to. And then we're just going to blend it in like we do with all the other colors. We're just going to grab those in between colors. We'll use the two colors that we used on the floor here, and we're just going to use our pressure varying between heavy presses and lighter presses to blend these two colors together. And then just keep working on blending these colors out. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here blending this out, and then we will jump to the background. And now let's go ahead and work on the background. Now you can do this on a separate layer, but I ended up doing it on the same layer as the floor. And I'm grabbing that greenish gray color, the square blend brush, and I'm just adding in some coloring here. I'm not too worried about blending quite yet because I'm just placing color and then we will work on blending. Now I'm going to pull in some grayish orange color as well. And again, I'm just placing color just to give it a little bit of interest to this background. I'm not really going with where the light source is. If you want to, you can. So you can go lighter on the left and darker on the right. But I'm just kind of placing coloring here, and then I'm going to blend everything out. Now jumping back to that grayish greeny blue color, I'm going to go over every color that I just placed and very lightly blend it out with each other again to blend things a little bit more seamlessly. Grab those in between colors, play around with that pressure sensitive brush because again we're using that square blend brush, so it's pressure sensitive. So we're just going to keep building this up, blending these colors together until it's looking how we want it to look for that background. Now I'm happy with how this is looking, so I'm going to start working on details with the mice. I'm going to start with the ears, hands, tail, and feet layer that we have here. I'm grabbing this red color, it's like a reddish orange color, and I'm going to be using the circle blend brush here. So I'm just going to add some details here and there around this just give some shadows. For the inner ears, I'm adding a little bit because again, it is a pressure sensitive brush. I'm just very lightly adding in some of the darker color here, going darker towards the inner ear and then blending it lighter out. And then again, we're going to add some details on the hands and feet and tail just to add some shadowy areas to give it the look that there's some shadow. And then you can use this light orange for some highlighted areas. So I did a little bit around the ears, just on the edge. Again, I went darker towards the inner ear and then lighter towards the edge. So I want to pull in a little bit more light. I didn't go too heavy handed with this because I didn't want it to be a white ear per se. I just wanted it to have a little bit of a shine to it, or a little bit of a light reflection to it. Same thing with the tails. I'm just going to add in a little bit of a lighter color there. The sides of the feet, again, being mindful of where my light source is coming from, which I'm having it come from the left. So all the lighter colors are going to go on the left side of the mouse, where the shadows and darker colors will go more on the right side. And I'm using the circle blend brush because I can add these colors with a very light touch and it blends in very nicely. So I can build up these layers, I can build up the dimension to this image without having to blend too much afterwards. And now I'm going to go in and add some darker areas around the nose, around the hands and the tail, just again being mindful where that shadow is with the mice. So on the right is where all my shadows are going to be. I'm also going to be mindful of where there's overlap. So for instance, this mouse on the top, near the top of the cherry stem, their hands are overlapping. So I just want to kind of give a little bit more definition between those two hands so that you know that there are two hands, not just one kind of weirdly shaped hand. And then usually what I like to do is once I add in the dark colors and the light colors, I'll go back with that base color that we used and blend those two colors together. So it's easiest way to do it for me. Again, you can also pull in those in between colors, but it's easier when you place the darker and lighter colors and then going back over with the base, you can kind of blend out those colors better, push them out a little bit. So if you went too heavy handed with the shadows, for instance, you can kind of take it back a little bit with that original color and it just blends in so nicely. Now that I have that done, I'm going to work on the apron. So I'm actually going to grab that dark yellowy green color and I'm going to add some shadows to these aprons. Now, as I'm adding in the shadows, I am pressing a little bit harder to give more of that color. I'm not doing light presses. I'm going to blend things out with that base color again towards the end, but I'm just placing the shadows where there should be shadows. So again, everything to the right will be in the shadow, everything to the left will be in the kind of light because that's where my light source is going to be. So I'm just adding in the shadow areas first, then I'll add in some highlighted areas, and then I'll use that original color that we use to blend everything out. And I'm kind of creating the kind of ties around these aprons. So if you think about an apron, right, you have ties to tie it in the back so it's not loose. So I'm just kind of using the shadow color to create the illusion that there are these ties. So that's what I'm doing here. And again, we will blend everything out so it looks very stark, contrasty right now. It's going to blend, it's going to look nice. Just, trust the process. We'll get there. We're just going to keep building up these colors. So now we're going to grab that lighter blue-green color and start doing the same thing that we did with the shadows, but we're going to add highlights to all the aprons. And if you wanted it to look a little choppy like that, you can leave the colors as is, but I want to blend them a little bit better. So I'm grabbing that base color and I'm going through blending all the aprons together so that it has this nice kind of blended seamless look from dark to light. And so I'm going to go do that with all the aprons, blend it out, and then I'm going to go over any areas that I want maybe to darken or to lighten if I went too dark or too light. I'm just going to go tweak those before we move on. And I'm using a lot of the colors just from the color palette to blend these areas out. But if you want to, you can pull those in between colors. But if you don't want to, you can just use the colors in the color palette as well. So originally I was erasing the area where that stem was going to be for the mouse and the apron, but I ended up changing that and copying a section of the stem and putting that above those layers. So if you want to erase it, you can do that. I just want to get it to be crisp and clean without having to worry about over erasing the edges. And so to kind of duplicate, go to the selection tool. I have it on freehand. I'm just highlighting the area I want to copy, which is basically the area that's covered, and then I'm moving that up above the other areas that I have here, and then there we have our stem in front of the mouse. Now we're going to work on the shirt layer. So I'm going to grab that grayish green, darker gray color in the bottom left there. And using that circle blend brush, I'm going to add in the shadows. Again, being mindful of where there would be shadows. So underneath the apron here. And I'm actually just kind of adding a little bit of variation across the surface here to give it the illusion that it's kind of puckered. So you can kind of play around with that if you want to. You can follow how I'm doing it. But I'm just going to add in the shadows, and then same thing how we did with the aprons. I will use the base color to kind of blend everything together. Now I am going to grab an in-between color. So we have this kind of grayish orange color, and I'm going to use that to do that in-between color instead of the base color. It was a little too bright for me, so I'm toning it down just a little bit with this color and using that lighter color we used for the base as the highlighted colors. And I'm not doing too many details on the shirts. I'm keeping it very basic. I'm not doing a lot of details across all of these because, again, I want to keep it pretty simple. When you see it from afar as a whole, you get the understanding of what this image is, but you don't have to go too detailed on things because you do understand, this is a shirt, it is wrinkled or it's puckering up in certain areas. So don't worry about too much of adding details. And now let's go ahead and add the hair detail to the mice. So the beauty with the circle blend brush is that you can create hair texture very easily. So I'm going to grab this dark brown color for the darker shadowy areas of the hair, and I'm just going to very lightly press small brush strokes onto the surface, and it's going to create hair-like texture. So I'm going to do that. I'm adding in all the darker areas first, and then I'll add in some lighter highlighted areas next. And again, be mindful of where shadows are. So I'm just placing it mostly to the right, underneath where the apron is, where there would be shadows. And then again, like I said, we'll go in and add in lighter details here in just a minute. And feel free to play around with the brush size. The larger the brush, the less you have to do detail, but I like a little bit smaller when I'm working on hair detail because it looks a little bit more like hair to me. Now we're going to use this light grayish orange color for highlights, and again, being mindful of where the light is coming from. I'm going to do it on the top and left of the mouse, and then I'm going to use that color to kind of blend it in, and then bring that original color back in to kind of tone these out and blend it even further. Now that I have the light color and darker color added, I'm just going to grab that original orange color and blend this out. And you'll notice that my brush strokes, I'm going up and down in that same direction that the hair is. I'm not just going in one direction, I'm just kind of taking it back and forth because it blends it better. And now all we need to do once we have the hair done is add in those final details. Now let's go ahead and add the eyes to the mice. So we can create this on the same layer as the hair layer that we have. And I'm just going to grab a black color. So it's not in the color palette. So I'm just going to go find a black color. I'm using that circle brush. And I'm just going to, again, add in the shape of the eyes here on that hair layer that we have for the mice. Now let's grab one of the white colors from the color palette, and I'm just going to add a little dot to the eyes to show that they're reflective. And now I'm going to turn the alpha lock off for this layer. I'm going to add the whiskers. If you have that alpha lock turned on, you won't be able to add whiskers. You will on the areas that we have colored, but if you wanted to go outside those areas, it wouldn't show up like it does here. So I'm just going to turn that alpha lock layer off and add the whiskers to all of the mice here. And there we have our cozy little mice baking session. Thank you so much for following along with me today. Let me know in the comments down below what you would like to see next, and I'll see everybody in the next video.